Blackouts across Europe and in the U.S., we are in an energy emergency, according to the White House. So are those blackouts coming our way here in the United States? Well, we're going to talk about that on this episode, and we got a lot to get into, including a law that has already been passed in the United States to control your car remotely and monitor what you're doing. We are going to talk about that and much more. We're going to get into government-controlled weather. We're going to talk about the history of climate change. Is this a hoax or is it real? We've got to talk about global energy, global green energy, and everything along with that. We got a lot coming up here, so make sure you stick around. Let's get into it right now. Well, welcome to Filibusted. We are here on another live show, and we got a lot to get into today. And but first, let's talk about what's happening over in Europe. So we had tens of millions of people experienced blackouts across Spain and Portugal, and it disrupted energy, or disrupted transportation, communication systems. It was this happened on April 28th, and this lasted 18 hours. It disrupted daily life for all these people, businesses, hospitals, critical infrastructure, all across Spain and Portugal. And at the worst point of the blackout, the entire Iberian Peninsula power generation fell to zero. And so that means two whole European countries had no energy being supplied to their national grids whatsoever for the best part of a day. And over 150,000 had to be rescued from underground trains, trapped in tunnels. We had elevators, hospitals, all without water, and public unable to buy food unless they had cash on hand, and telephones, internet, all disrupted. So this is quite a situation. And so my question to you guys to kick this off is, are these blackouts a flaw in this system, or is that part of the design of this system? What do you guys think is going on here?
I think systems are a little bit too complex to accidentally do, or to not anticipate things like that. But I also don't ever believe in coincidences. Like that is a huge issue to have just happen out of nowhere for people in that much of a position of power and control over the energy grid to be like, oh, we didn't see that coming, you know. I don't know the details on it, but I have a hard time believing that it's that this was not foreseen in some way.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me was like they're saying that this is the first mass electrical outage on a grid largely powered by wind and solar energy. Now, they say largely powered. I don't know what percentage that is. It's probably lower than you would assume when they say largely powered. Ryan, you may have more details on that. But it's interesting that at least up to a few days ago, they still didn't know what caused it. And I'm like, man, that's crazy to me. A couple months back, there was a monkey that got into a power station in Sri Lanka and shut down the entire country's power for, I think, about 6 hours itself. I'm guessing the monkey didn't survive, you know, but it's like they're like, well, it was a monkey, right? They knew what caused it, and they could see where the outage happened and what, you know, and it's like, in this case, I'm like, what's going on when they say they don't know what's causing this?
You know what that reminds me of? The what was it? The squirrel that got into CERN and chewed up the wires and shut down an entire massive project like CERN.
A squirrel single-handedly causes a massive black hole portal to appear in the sky.
Really? Is that the story we're going with? Yeah.
Yeah.
CERN has had all kinds of problems with animals.
I thought it was a weasel. I'm pretty sure it was a
weasel. Yeah, and it was some little critter and something like that. I can't remember exactly what.
Birds.
So, you know, one of the, I think I'll find the exact stat, but I think it's over 60% of the power. I mean, that for these specific things, for these outages. And one of the things that really, when it comes to this, the criticisms of this is these so-called green energy methods don't have inertia and they don't have redundancy. And so what does that mean? So it's traditional power networks like coal and gas and hydroelectric, they're insulated against shock, which is what happened here, because there's inertia that, if you remember from physics class, there's this big spinning metal part of these turbines and these generators inside these power stations. And so if the power goes out, the momentum that has spinning keeps it going, and that continues to generate electricity, so that when the power gets reconnected, then it just sort of picks up where it's going, and there's no actual break in electricity because of that momentum. And so solar power, all these have no moving parts. Like these, there's nothing to have that inertia. And what's crazy about this is that these international organizations for energy, even the lefty ones warn about this. I mean, this is not a surprise, and this just shows this is where I say, is this stupidity, is this ignorance, or is this the design? Where
I think it's all.
I think it's kind of yeah. I do think it's kind of all probably both part of the design and both partially stupidity.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people really believe that, and I'm sure we'll get more into the solar panel and the wind turbines. But I'll put two countries here. So you guys probably know about like the Green New Deal, or maybe that was what the United States called it. But years ago, Europe and the US, were like, okay, we're going to try to switch over to green energy. I'll just put two European countries out here. So you have Germany and you have France. So Germany said, okay, let's be more green. We're going to move over to wind and solar. And so after I think of like a decade of trying to be more green and going to wind and solar, what Germany has had to do is it's actually had to open up more coal burning plants. And coal burning, one of the most polluting ways that you can generate electricity, just straight up burning coal. So Germany has actually become more pollutant because by attempting to rely on solar and wind, like you said, well, so solar and wind only works when the sun's shining, when the wind is blowing. Other methods, all you have to do is turn on. Whenever you need power, you just turn it on. The other problem as well is they rely on batteries because again, the wind doesn't blow all the time. The sun doesn't shine all the time, especially the sun shines during the day. And actually people use more electricity at nighttime when the sun isn't shining. So those systems highly are required to use batteries. And batteries, you can make the argument that the amount of batteries you need to back up those sort of systems is actually, because you have to dig for all that cobalt, it's actually more of a pollutant. And that stuff ends up in landfills, and it's heavy metals and all that kind of stuff. So but back to my point, though, you have France and you have Germany. So that was Germany's route. They said, we're going to go solar and power. It hasn't worked out very well for them. It's made them have a worse energy grid, and they're burning more coal today than they were in the past. And then you have France, and France said, well, we're going to go nuclear energy because they believed, rightfully so, that nuclear energy is green energy. It's the least pollutant energy in the world. In fact, you can fit all of the nuclear waste ever created in the history of mankind. You can fit it in one single building, a 100-foot cube building, 100 feet, tall, wide, thick. That's how big of a building you need to fit all the nuclear waste ever created. One nuclear power plant is enough to replace, I think it was, I have it in my notes here. It's 3 million solar panels. So one nuclear power plant a year is the same as 3 million solar panels. And also those solar panels, after about 40, 50 years, they burn out and you have to replace them, and recycling them is expensive. And so I think that's if really Portugal and Spain are relying heavily on solar and solar especially, and wind, I think that's probably part of the problem here. And part of it really is just stupidity. It really is just people thinking that somehow they're going green by relying on this, when in fact there's actually better, more efficient, less pollutant ways to power your country.
I think stupidity also virtue signaling, to where it's kind of like, look at this, look at what we're doing, and all this, and we can make the case that we're going to make the case a little bit later about how this is actually about control. And there's a lot of people that we could put in the category of, pardon the term, but it's like useful idiot. Like they don't really know what's going on, but they're just kind of going along with it and so forth. So I gotta go ahead.
To respond to one of your questions, Ryan, I want to jump in here because it goes along with what Reese was saying. The idea of like having to store power on batteries and that kind of stuff. One of the things I found in my research, and I had to research this a lot because I know next to nothing, almost everything I know about energy and fuel I've learned playing Minecraft. So that's very helpful. But essentially, there's one of the things I found is there's something called a PSH, which is pumped storage hydroelectricity. And it's actually the most widely used and highest capacity form of grid energy storage. So essentially they pump water from a lower reservoir to a higher reservoir, and then they just use gravity and they release that water. So same thing as like a water wheel, you can imagine, or a hydroelectric dam. But it's something that they charge up by pumping the water during times of high energy production, and low energy usage. And then when the power goes out, boom, now they can release the water, and they've got a constant source of energy even during power outages. And so I feel like there's other ways to store the energy besides just batteries, and that kind of stuff that they could be taking advantage of that they're not. So maybe it is a system failure. Maybe there's a problem with the system and energy storage that they're not taking advantage of.
Yeah, I think the big issue here is that I think there's a big difference between when we have a problem that we're actually trying to solve, like we're putting our best minds together and we really want to have the best solution, versus a problem where we want to kind of look like we're trying to solve it, or we really have another motive driving us, not actually solving that problem. And I think it's a combination of these things here. And I want to do a little tour, unless you had anybody else had any other thoughts. I want to do a little green energy global tour if you want to. I'm going to take us around the world and give a one-sentence summary of every region of the world and their approach to green energy. So let's go ahead and start in Europe. Europe
Ryan,
is the.
I hate to tell you, but we don't actually have the budget for that on this show. So I'm just kidding.
We're gonna do it while we're sitting here. It's okay.
Virtual tour.
Get some more solar panels here. Okay. Europe. Let's start in Europe. That's right in the front of everybody's mind. Europe is the poster child of green idealism gone wrong. That's the summary of this, because they overcommitted to renewables without a safety net. We've sort of played that out a little bit here, and now they're paying the price for energy insecurity and deindustrialization. And so they, I didn't prepare this, but maybe we can pull it up, where Trump is meeting with Germany and they're saying they're going to stand up to Russia. And Trump says, how are you going to stand up to Russia when they give you more than 30% of your energy? You're not going to stand up to anybody doing that. And so he called them to task on that. And that there's these sort of just schizophrenic things. Okay, now what about the U.S.? Well, the U.S. is a subsidizing failure. That's the summary here. They're increasing energy fragility while sidelining its own energy strengths like natural gas and nuclear. So we were energy independent under Trump's first term. And the first thing that the next person in the office did under that regime was to remove that energy independence for the U.S. So U.S. subsidizing failure, Europe poster child for idealism gone wrong. India is their real need is reliability. So they need cheap dispatchable power. They don't need symbolic solar targets or whatever that sort of thing is. How about Eastern Europe? So Eastern Europe, they need energy security. So they're stuck between Brussels mandates, so coming from the European Union with all these wacky stuff that I mentioned from Europe, and the risks of being further tied to Moscow, being further tied to Russia. And so solar and wind, neither one of those are going to fix that. All right. So what about South America? South America is being mined. Listen to this. South America is being mined for green minerals while still facing energy poverty at home. Wow. So their minerals are being used for all this green stuff, but they still have their own energy issues throughout South America. And so what about China? This is probably my favorite. China's gaming the system. China is gaming the system. They use green optics and exports to weaken the West while they prioritize energy realism domestically. And that's the summary of the world. And when it comes to green energy. So was that a surprise for anybody? Did anything stick out to you guys? What do you guys think about all that?
Do you have any details on the Brussels regulations that you talked about? Because like what kinds of regulations are there, or that they're
it's more about like these targets. It's more about like the targets that they say. So I can pull up some of these loose targets, like by 2050 they want to have a certain amount of renewable energy. By 2050 they want to have, it's like those kinds of things. And then they start to try and they want to move the needle. They want to move the needle on those goals, but they do it in a way that cuts their feet out from underneath them, because then they have these problems like we literally just had. Like they're literally the day or the day after Spain and all of them in Europe start bragging about being 100% reliable on this, the whole thing goes out. It's just like you can't make.
I'm just getting a picture of like like standing on a cliff face and your enemy is standing behind you and being like, don't worry, I'll hold your hand while you get close to the edge. And that's China pushing us over the edge,
Right.
Like, hey, we're going to stand away from the edge here, but we're going to make sure you get real close to it.
It is pretty hilarious because you're absolutely right, Tori, because China right now is exporting like just tons and tons of like electric vehicles and other, like you said, like green optic sort of products essentially.
And it's dirty clean energy. Like it's not
no,
the way they
absolutely.
Make this energy is not
it's a facade. It's only green energy on the surface because China is the biggest polluter in every domain. China, and
they're still making power. They make like 2 or 3 power plants a day, coal power plants,
right?
And
a day or a week,
coal
like crazy.
And they're not burning coal the cleaner way that we do it in the West. They're burning coal like back in the day, and they got
like dystopian style.
Yeah.
Black
So I
cloud.
mean, exactly. I mean, I've been to China several times, and I remember like they're literally. This is not a joke. This is not a joke. I was there for 3 days, and in Beijing, and I asked somebody. I said, like, is it always this foggy? Like, why is it so foggy? And the guy said, that's not fog. That's smog. That's like pollution. And I was like, I laughed. I literally laughed. I was like, oh, that's funny, you know, because it's kind of like the stereotypical thing. No, it's real. Like you could taste it. Like it's insane. And that's why like during the Olympic Games and whatever big conferences they shut down industry 2 weeks before so that it's clean and clear skies. And we're going to get into this later about governments controlling weather. And this is actually public stuff. And this goes back to the 40s. And so we're going to talk about, we'll do another global tour about who's winning the arms race for weather control. But, you know, it's clear that this is not a transition to clean energy. It's a transition to unstable energy. And
no, it absolutely is. It reminds me of something that people will refer to sometimes as like anarcho tyranny. Essentially, it's where you have these like you know, they're called like ivory tower ideas or luxury beliefs. Essentially, where you have this luxury beliefs in Europe, where like, okay, we're gonna be running off of solar panels by the year 2030, and we're gonna do whatever we need to do to get to that point. But at the same time, it's like, one, you have to enact a form of tyranny in order to do that, which in the EU is heavily regulations. And I don't know all the details myself, Troy, but I know more about the United States, which I'll get into in a second. But I know the EU loves their regulations. They're huge on regulations. They make it really hard to build new plants, to do anything. And if you're doing something that's not green, then they'll slap you with all the red tape, essentially. But so you have these luxury ideas of like, okay, we're going to somehow do this with solar. It's not working. And then they just keep plowing ahead with it. And then so that's a mix of like, is it just stupidity and virtue signaling, or is it part of it is somebody actually wants the system to fall apart and so they can enact more tyranny? You know, that's going the sort of conspiratorial route. But the evidence is kind of there because it ends up causing, you know, these sort of, you know, power outages and collapses. And we need energy in order to thrive in a modern day civilization. But in the US, to give you an idea of what this sort of regulation can look like, I thought this was really interesting. Right now, we actually have tech companies who are trying to fund nuclear power. They're trying to build new nuclear power plants. So this is Amazon, Google, Microsoft. There's just 3. I think it's actually more. But I know these 3 specifically right now, they're making contracts and they're dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into nuclear power startups and also old plants, trying to get them restarted because they need more energy. Their energy need is doubling right now because of their AI infrastructure and their data centers and stuff like that. And so we have a hope in the United States for maybe more clean, really cheap energy coming through nuclear power plants. Like, again, I said one nuclear power plant is the same as, I think it was 3 million solar panels. It's also the same as 430 massive wind turbines.
Wow.
Like that's how much energy it puts out, 430 of those. And again, both of those things burn out and end up in landmines, and nuclear power instead is very, very efficient and produces a very small amount of waste. It's also the safest. We've had less deaths from like nuclear power than any other energy that we've had. But to get into the regulation really fast, at the same time, tech companies and multiple states are suing the Nuclear Regulatory Commission right now because they have only allowed 3 new plants to be opened in the last 25 years in the United States.
Wow.
And all 3 of those plants were over budget and over schedule because of all the red tape. And so right now you have multiple states, which ones? Texas, Louisiana, Arizona, Florida, Utah. They're all suing, as well as several startups, suing this regulatory body here in the United States. It's essentially saying you guys are making it impossible for us to build new nuclear power plants. And now we have these massive contracts with tech companies that want these built. And so I don't know. So we'll see if the US is able to cut down on regulation. Maybe we'll get to the point where we can be energy independent again, which we could be off of fossil fuels in a moment if we wanted to. But this is another route to take as well.
Right. Well, maybe that's interesting, Reese, that obviously you are a huge proponent for nuclear energy, you know, probably.
If you can't tell.
If I can't tell, yeah.
That's my rant. I'm done with the nuclear power after this. That's my rant for the day.
Okay, one of the things I came across I was talking to y'all about briefly before we got started was last night I discovered a statement from the White House that was released the day that Trump was inaugurated, and this is the title of it: Declaring a National Energy Emergency. So this was released January 20th, 2025. So the United States technically right now is in a national energy emergency, and most people probably don't know that. But one reason being, it's not as much of an emergency as you might, the headline might make you assume. But then at the same time, it kind of is, because it's something that has been a long time coming. And they pointed back to the previous administration saying, hey, they're not recognizing the signs. They're not doing anything about the problems that are stacking up, And so we're trying to do something. So some of the things that this energy emergency allowed for is to essentially speed up the ability to solve some of these problems. So this is what it says. It says there's a precariously inadequate and intermittent energy supply and an increasingly unreliable grid, and they require swift and decisive action. So they're targeting the grid problems that we have here in the United States. Which, to kind of give you a little bit of an idea I also came across this in another article yesterday, if I can find it. But it's talking about the Pacific Northwest, and it says there we go. 30 gigawatts of new power is estimated to be needed by 2030 in the Northwest grid of the USA, and we've only added 1 gigawatt in the past 8 years. So that's 4 years. 5 years from now, what year are we in? 2026? No, 2025. And so, yeah, I'm living in La La Land, obviously.
It's okay.
But we've got a long ways to go, and a lot of that, the Pacific Northwest is needing more power more quickly because of things like EV, creation, things like AI companies, all that kind of stuff. We're essentially just burning the power a whole lot faster than normal. But anyways, back to what's happening here in the United States. So what the other thing that it allowed for allows for more energy creation, more energy, new ideas to be implemented. It allows for any authorities over energy supply and creation here in the United States to essentially do their job that they weren't being allowed to do. It allows for the usage of federal lands to produce energy by any means necessary. So, that's kind of a positive and a negative. They might be like digging up the national parks at some point, and drilling for oil. I have no idea. So that would suck. But yeah, anyways, we're all of that to say we're in this state of crisis, according to the White House. And they talk about how it poses an imminent threat to the national security of the United States. If you don't have a strong power grid, you've got national security issues. It poses a threat to the well-being of American citizens. And so I think Trump is really trying to speed up some of these processes that have needed to happen over, for a long time. And unfortunately, the only thing that's been getting the green check mark for a long time is stuff that has the label green energy slapped onto it, which I'm 100% a proponent for sustainable energy sources, 100%. But we need to look at the reality of, is this a real sustainable energy issue, or is it a fake, just hypocritical green energy issue, so it's like there's kind of a difference there. There's a big difference between something that's real and something that's just a facade.
I think it can be both at the same time. I actually wonder, I like to get into the speculative thought processes on these kinds of things, because we're talking about things that happen in the future. Like obviously it's happening right now too, but we're projecting into the future to see, well, what's actually coming down the pipeline. That's kind of like the big question at hand is, what are we going to do about the energy crisis? Because we're clearly in one. And I can't help but think like there's this war going on between green energy and then not green energy. And, those are big umbrellas on both sides. But at some point, one of them has to win out as the typical way of thinking. But there is actually a third option that comes in sometimes. And it's when these two are done destroying each other, another one emerges from out of the ashes in the middle of that and actually dominates the scene. And I think that is going to be this idea of free energy. And I'm talking like dip back into, Nikola Tesla kind of thinking. And with the revelation of the pyramids recently and how they could be a big energy source in just the sheer design of how they are, My thumbs up thing, man. I have not turned it off yet. I don't even know.
They're watching you.
I have
like,
no
they like
idea.
that.
That's
how to
your
turn
opinion,
off
whether
the
you
thumbs
like it
up.
or
Somebody
not.
like that.
Yep.
We're like, all right, free energy, Tesla coil.
Well, I love that concept because I mean, what's that famous phrase like necessity is the mother of invention? You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like
And I
that's
think that's
really
what's gonna happen.
that's really where we need to kind of like focus over the next 20, 30 years because you know, all the green energy and climate, you know, and you know, crisis people and the global warming people, they're all saying, okay, this is going to happen by 2030, this is going to happen by 2050, this is going to happen by 2070 or whatever. And it's like, okay, yeah, unless somebody actually invents something that changes the game,
Well,
you know?
yeah,
Right.
yeah, and
Or
I think
uncover something that
Right.
has always been here all along that we've just been told isn't a thing and doesn't exist. And now all of a sudden it's like, actually, you know what? We've got a resolution to this problem that's immediate. We can just turn it on and fix everything. And everybody's going to be like, oh, okay, cool. Let's do that instead.
Yeah, I think one of the things, it's like I've heard other podcasts and things talking about like nuclear fusion. Like that's something where the reaction creates more energy than it consumes, and so it's kind of like this self-perpetuating thing. And there's examples of United States government taking research out of universities and forcing them to shut down research and sort of things. And that's where, you know, I've kind of heard that the actual research that exists is like 20, 30 years ahead of what the public knows about. And
yeah,
there's all this kind of things. And that's where you really get into the conspiracy. But we thought, you know, like we said, conspiracy and reality, the difference is about 6 months. And what we're seeing, I think that's getting less and less. But the truth is the electric car still runs on coal. It just comes from a different zip code. Like that's kind of what's happening. I mean, that's how they're made. I mean, you've all seen the person with the electric bike with the plug that goes into the charging tower that has a plug that goes into the power plant that's actually creating the energy. So you're not really doing anything except storing energy with batteries and that sort of thing. But I think, you know, one of the things I think we need to get into now, unless anybody else had any other thoughts on that, but I want to give a quick history, decade by decade, of the climate change. And then I want to get into this surprising remote control the government wants to do with your vehicles. So what do you guys think? Should we jump in?
Yeah, my final comment on that, Ryan, just to reiterate what you said before is, you know, and I love that we're about to hop into the climate change topic, because this is the reason why it's always touted that we cannot have energy independence. Like, why can't we just dig for more oil? We could have energy independence right now. Why can't we create more power plants, whatever kind of plants they are, and have cheap energy? But yeah, quick 2 points. It's just one, besides the security issues that we talked about, also energy costs drive inflation. So that's part of the emergency that we're in. If anyone thinks that you're not experiencing an energy crisis right now, inflation is largely caused by energy costs. The cheaper our energy, the cheaper everything is, because energy helps produce literally everything. So as energy costs go up, which they do, unfortunately, underneath the Green New Deal and all that kind of the regulation that we've had, cutting back on being able to start new plants, cutting back on drilling, the amount of subsidies, government spending, all your tax dollars being dumped into research for solar and wind, which is not providing us efficient energy, you know, all that kind of stuff that drives inflation. So right now we have inflation being driven. And then also to your point, Ryan, it's like that facade is at a global scale right now, because just like you said, we're mining in South America where people are energy insecure, where they don't have energy themselves. We're mining these countries for their precious resources so we can have batteries, so we can feel good here in you know, richer countries. And that again goes back to that ivory tower mentality of like, why don't we just create good you know, efficient energy here with the resources we have, whether that's fossil fuels, nuclear, whether that's Tesla coils, if we can really resurrect that sort of technology from the past, you know, whatever it is, you know, that's yeah, anyways, I digress, but I'd love to get into the climate change stuff.
Well, yeah, and I think we really you hit the nail on the head about this elites kind of sacrificing everybody else to just kind of do the feel good thing. But I think that it's a combination of that and control and what they want to be able to do with these things being put in place. And so I think we're going to get into that here in just a minute. But, you know, I think there was one other thing I was going to say, but I forgot the point, but it'll come back to me. But So let's talk about the history of climate change. So in the 1970s, it was a global cooling panic. Okay, so it was cooling. Everything's cooling off. We got to panic. We got to do something about it. 1980s, okay, that shifted to global warming. So now 80s and 90s, it was global warming instead of cooling. And then from 1992 to 1997, that's when they started really pushing these policy frameworks and different treaties and things like that going around in the U.S. and around the world. And in the early 2000s is when Al Gore and this mainstreaming of alarmism really, really took place. And so then you get into the 2010s, and that was when a lot more skepticism started coming up. And so they started suppressing this skepticism and expanding the bureaucracy with all this kind of stuff. And I'm going to give an example here of something that's happening in the Midwest. And then we have in the 2020s.
I just saw that face pop up on this.
We got Al Gore on the screen here.
To see a picture of Al Gore.
What a great picture of him too.
We got a young Al Gore here on the
Hey,
screen.
that's the guy that invented the internet.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think there's a quote from Abraham Lincoln that says, "Don't trust everything you see on the internet." But anyway,
Exactly.
That's not Al Gore.
Oh, okay. 2020s. Okay, so 2010s, suppression of skepticism, expanding bureaucracy around the world. 2020s, and now we have climate emergency and global controls. And that's exactly what we're talking about here. You know, in the Midwest, I'll give the example. I was going to talk about remote control next, but in the Midwest, they have something called a carbon pipeline. Have you guys heard of this? This is absolute insanity. This is not a joke. And I've done some interviews on my podcast with this, with Steve, what's his name, from Iowa, retired representative. But they're using eminent domain to take land from farmers to put a pipeline underground so they can capture CO2, liquefy it, and put it in a carbon capture system to put it underground and to help remove CO2 from the atmosphere. And that's,
Are you kidding me?
I'm not kidding. And it's very dangerous because you can have explosions with this liquefied CO2, and they're actually pumping it so it's coming out of these ethanol plants and all this kind of stuff, and they're pitching it like it's this big green thing, but actually they get this liquefied CO2 and they have other purposes for it.
Right,
so
that's got to be it, because like
the government is stealing land to do this, and this is Steve King. That's what I was trying to think of. He's a big proponent of exposing all this, but it's happening because you have Summit Carbon Solutions. There's these companies. It's like this mix of these government people and these private people, and there's a big connection to the ethanol lobby and all this kind of stuff. So that's crazy.
What are they doing with it? Like, where are they putting it? What are they using it for?
I think it's going up to like North Dakota. It's just sitting under the ground. They say it's going to sit there until they find out what they can do with it. But the truth is, they already know what they're going to do with it. They have a way to profit from it, and so it's just
you have to.
Can you still think I'm joking? I mean, you still think this is a joke?
Well, kind of, but no, because you just got to follow the money. But I mean, I'm no chemist or biologist or whatever profession this is, but like, can't we just plant some trees? That's what that sounded like to me. Like,
talking about carbon capture. Yeah, the most efficient way to capture carbon is really just plants. But
Well, the thing that actually, if we got rid of it all, like there would be no life here. So I mean, that's like, why do they have it so much of it in submarines, and why do they have the places, greenhouses? They got a lot of CO2 and all this. So that's a whole nother topic. But I got to get in. Any other thoughts on that? Otherwise, I got to get into this.
No, I agree. I think the whole like follow the money trail is a huge thing. So like every time we have a power outage here in our neighborhood from a storm, we have swarms of solar panel salesmen come to our door and try to sell us solar panels for our roof. But they always say, and I think I've shared this with y'all before, they always imply that if I buy these expensive solar panels and get another mortgage or whatever to be able to pay for them, then next time the power goes out, I'm going to have power, right? Because power is an essential need. It's like going to the grocery store and it's like, how much are the eggs and milk, right? It's like something I need to survive, so they're taking advantage of an essential need that everybody has, power. And it's like, how do you skim money off the top? Someone's always going to be skimming money or, mining like insane amounts of money off the top of an essential need that people have. I think that obviously the same thing is happening across the board here, with all of these things, green energy, climate crisis, somebody's making money hand and fist, if that's the right phrase. Is that how you say it?
One big Hegelian dialect. The whole thing is like, create the problem, provide the solution. Ta-da.
Right.
You make a lot of money doing that.
No, it absolutely is. And Ryan, I don't know if you're going to get into this. I'm just going to mention this briefly since we're on CO2 right now. But I actually put together, and if people on the stream haven't figured out by now, we're definitely not believers in the whole climate change.
Climate
narrative.
alarmism. Climate's always
Hey,
changing.
speak for
but
yourself.
Climate's always changing, but climate
Well,
alarmism.
okay, yes.
People
I am a
caused and all
believer that
Just
the
a caveat,
climate
yeah.
is always changing. In fact, that's
Right.
kind of the point. It's the man-made climate crisis that we're talking about. But I did my research this week, so I'm actually going to drop this later underneath the live stream. I'll drop it in like my own comment, but I have like scores of resources that go into proving that every single one of the narrative points being put out as if we are in a climate crisis are all verifiably false. But here's just one of them, which I think is really important. The CO2 in the atmosphere, and it gets into what you talked about with the carbon capture, because I've heard about that. That's big in the US right now. It's also huge in Australia. Australia has been doing the carbon capture, and I've seen so much people complain about it, being like, this isn't doing anything. And it's literally just a grift. It's just a way for these companies to come in and be like, oh, we're going to solve the climate crisis. Give us all this money. And they're just doing the most ridiculous things with all their taxpayer money. It's absolutely ridiculous. But here is just one point. So almost this entire narrative is built on CO2 in the atmosphere causes the earth to warm. And this is kind of crazy. This is actually, this is agreed upon by atmospheric physicists from Princeton and Yale. So these are like renowned scientists that all agree on this, that CO2, once you get to a certain point in the atmosphere, it actually no longer causes the earth to warm anymore. So to up to a certain point, increasing CO2, because it is a greenhouse gas, it does increase warming of the earth. But once you get to a certain point, it's so saturated that it does not continue to warm the earth after that point. And this is something that scientists actually agree on. Again, people from Princeton, people from Yale are like, what they say is we are actually well past that point. The CO2 in the atmosphere, they say if you doubled the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, it would have no effect on the warming of the earth. And so the crisis is entirely hinges upon how much CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere. And I have a graph we can pull up later that puts into this as well, but it's entirely on that fact. It's like we keep dumping CO2 into the atmosphere. We have to stop this. We have to stop burning fossil fuels. We have to do carbon capture. We have to do all this stuff, but it's entirely missing the point that two reasons. One is in the past, scientists say we've had way more CO2 in the atmosphere than we do today. Even before industrialized human civilization, there's times in the past, and they say that we had equal temperatures, sometimes even cooler temperatures, with more CO2 in the atmosphere. So that by itself almost wipes out most of the climate change narrative, which is based around we cannot keep putting CO2 in the atmosphere or we're going to boil the oceans. And the science just says that's absolutely not true. We've had more CO2 in the past, and we've already reached the point where you could double the CO2 and it would have almost no effect on the temperatures that you see here on the earth. Not to say that pollution doesn't exist. We can pollute the earth in lots of different ways, but burning fossil fuels and CO2 is not the destruction of the world that we've been told.
Troy, I want to make sure you say your point. I just want to say quick, how much CO2 is in the atmosphere? Does anybody know? It's 0.04%. That's 100,000ths of a percent. So that means if you have a stadium with 100,000 people in it, that's 4 people. So that is how much percent. That's what's controlling this. And so why don't we see when they use it in submarines and they explode the amounts in there for safety and to have a good atmosphere, and they do it in greenhouses? Why aren't you seeing like you said, there's a point where it no longer warms. It's not an effect on that anymore. Okay, Troy, go ahead.
Yeah, just going back to what Reese was saying about, scientists saying like the Earth has never had, or we've had this much CO2 before, more, and it's never been gotten too hot or whatever. I think that's one of the things that the whole global warming narrative is built on. That's kind of a very shaky ground, because they'll say we're hotter now than we've ever been in the history of the world, or whatever. Like some people use that, and they'll say, but it's like, well, how do you know that? Like, did you catch a ride on the TARDIS, and go look at, go measure the temperatures like 2,000 years ago or whatever it was, and obviously they're talking in like millions of years and stuff, which I don't agree with personally, but it's this idea of like, they study rocks, they study rock signatures, fossils, crystals, ocean sediments, and, and all that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, great. But could you really tell me how hot the world was, like 20,000 years ago or whatever, based on what's inside a rock? And I think the data is just very flimsy. And I mean, obviously, scientists can't even figure out how old the world is, and it's like all of that data is just mixed up. So I think it's just a very bad system of data that they're working with. And then they go the opposite way and they say this is exactly how it's going to be in 100 years. And it's like you don't know how it's going to be in 100 years,
Right.
Like you're trying to bring another layer of cancel culture and like guilt, upon a generation from the future. Like they're going to say, why didn't you do something about this? And it's like, maybe they will, maybe they won't, but I do agree with some of the things like Reese raised the point of like pollutants in the air. It's like, I do agree with some of the things that they're toting, they're talking about. I would love to see less like synthesized materials being burned, or whatever it is, I'd love to see less, chemicals, being burned in our atmosphere and potentially affecting people's health and that kind of stuff. There are some things that I agree with. Obviously a lot of things I don't. But I think sometimes it is a mixed bag.
Yeah, and I think having solar panels and all that stuff and infrastructure for solar and wind energy coming from China is not the way to do it in a clean way. That is less pollution. Like that's not right. That's like, if we really cared about that, then we felt that we needed to support their economy by buying these things from them. We should be having an urgency in making sure they do it in a clean way. That because all this is doing is pushing the dirtiness of the energy production further back up the supply chain. And so, and slave labor or child labor and all this kind of stuff in these different mines and things that, I mean, it's absolute insanity. So, Okay. Are we ready to jump into this remote control of your vehicle? So
I got a quick question for you. Are we going to circle back to the blackouts in Europe at some point?
I think we should. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yes. I just want to share this. This is sort of showing you an idea of where this is going when it comes to control. And this is still in the context of this conversation. So this is just another caveat. Okay, this is quick. All right. So there's a current law in the United States of America called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That sounds fantastic, doesn't it? It just really sounds really very good. In November 2021, this was signed into law, and Section 24220 directs the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration to establish a rule requiring new passenger vehicles manufactured after 2026 be equipped with what they call is impaired driving prevention technology. So they're saying, we got too many drunk drivers, so we need to watch you drive and monitor your driving 100% of the time. But don't worry, it's passive. So it passively monitors a driver's performance to detect impairment or prevent or limit the vehicle operation if impairment is detected. What is that in layman's terms? It's a kill switch. They can turn off the vehicle remotely whenever they want to. That is exactly what it is. And so this gets into privacy concerns, which is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. And so that's obviously the big issue. But if you think that this is not really an intention, well, then how do you explain a response bill that is now being questioned that is now coming into consideration? So that actually passed and is law in the United States. So if this other law does not change, starting after 2026, all new vehicles will have a remote kill switch and they will be able to monitor your driving. Literally, it says passively, but how can you do that passively? Like all the cameras in China monitor the passively monitor people, and then they take money out of their account when they jaywalk. All automatic. Like that's passive, right? So if this wasn't real, then why do we have this coming? So Representative Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, he introduced the No Kill Switches in Cars Act, which seeks it's HR 1137. And so he introduced that in February 7th, 2025. So not that long ago at the time of recording this. And so that looks to repeal just that one section and eliminate that mandate for new vehicles. So is that insanity or what? I mean, you could also, like now I'm going to buy a new washer dryer. And you can it says this has got Bluetooth and you can hook it to your Wi-Fi and you can see who's at your door while you're doing laundry. Look at this little camera here now. And it's like, and like you could buy a microwave that connects to your oven. And like, I don't understand why anybody would want any of this technology, but all this is bringing everything up to what? This is from climate lockdowns that probably are coming. You have digital carbon tracking, like track your own footprint. This is building a system of total control. And this climate is just an excuse to go that route. What did China do? Case in point. And we always go back to China, but it's kind of like they're the front runner on this whole, communism thing. And that's why I say why is climate change not a big deal in China? Because they already have communism there. So
Right.
That's a genius move. I mean, everybody would freak out in the land of the free, home of the brave if they started putting cameras on every street corner and inside your home. But if they can get us to buy the stuff ourselves and like pay for it ourselves and put it in our house,
We
and
have
think
more
it's a
monitoring
they said, I've seen with a Wi-Fi router only, with a Wi-Fi router, they can monitor the signals and how the signals are bouncing off the wall, and they can tell how many people are in the room.
They can
they're
figure out
standing.
where you're at.
You gotta
in
be
the
kidding
room.
me.
Yeah.
So
also, the other part of
Big
that
Brother,
too is
Big
your
Brother.
phone cameras are constantly taking pictures.
that's why I was just showing
All
this
the
the
time.
phone and listening and all this sort of stuff. And so
We've already got that surveillance.
they've already used this passive listening of a phone to convict people of crimes. Like that's already been done. Okay, so China, what's China doing? They have this COVID app that came out, and people have to use it to get into their own apartment. So what they have to do is they have to take their phone and they scan it, and if it shows green, their own apartment unlocks. If it shows red, they can't get into their own apartment because they say, oh, well, they went to this area and they have a risk of being infected with COVID, so now they can't get into their own apartment. Then you have a huge rise of homelessness in China. This was back starting in 2020. And so, but the thing is, really, they are tracking internet searches, they're tracking everything, and then they remove access for something. And I even heard, and they blame like, oh, it's a COVID, or oh, it's a risk of this or that. And it turns out it was because they did a search for a Bible, buy a Bible online 3 years ago. And they all have a social credit score in China. And so like I interviewed Kay Rubicek, who gave examples of this actually happening, where they went back through people's internet search history and they have evidence of getting this, shutting down access to education or these kinds of things. So that's where this is going. That's the whole point of this. So Troy, what do we got here?
Slowly happening too.
I just pulled up an article about the Wi-Fi being used to detect human locations. Like, it's not just how many people are in the home. They can literally paint a 3D image. I've seen the graphs that they've done in the drawings based on heat signatures and stuff. Literally from somebody's Wi-Fi signal in their house. They can figure out where the people are located. It's crazy.
Yeah.
What are you saying, Doug?
Go ahead, Doug.
I was just saying, I just want to point out, I agree with our friend, Overflow of His Glory. Yep. Right here with you. Let's do it. Let's just see what happened,
Hey, Reese, I live close enough to our mom and dad that I think me and my family would be okay. We would just drive out there and hang out with them in their bomb shelter for a while.
Yeah. Being out in the country, I guess.
I
saw earlier in the chat somebody put it about solar flares potentially knocking out the grids as well. So that's always an option. But to your point, Ryan, I think bringing up COVID is a really good example of this, because as we all know now today, that the COVID pandemic was definitely a overblown scare. Whether it was 100% intentional or not, it was definitely a overblown scare and was used to basically experiment on the population to be like, how much of this control can we push? Can we make everyone stay in their homes? And can we, can we regulate what everybody does at all times? And the fact that, the most tyrannical countries in the world, like China, went ahead and did a full blown enacting of social credit score and used COVID as an example of as an excuse to block you out of whatever it was. Or in Canada, if you protested in Canada, then they either drained your bank accounts or froze your bank accounts. I don't remember which one, but all the truckers had their assets stolen essentially by Canada, who were protesting that sort of situation. So it's not. I don't think it's too crazy to say we could. Hopefully not in the United States, especially with the way that things are going here and the sort of vibe shift, as we've said, and like the establishment power moving over to the right and being more in favor of energy independence. But it's not too crazy to think, especially in places like Europe, where people would say, hey, we're in a climate disaster, even though it's narrative, even though it's lies, even though it's completely made up, and say, oh, the world's going to burn if we don't do something. So this is more important than your freedom. So we just turned off your car. We are now enacting these sort of policies to control your life, essentially. They already did it during COVID, and so they just need another excuse to do it again.
So I want to talk about government weather control and the history of that here, and kind of this arms race around the world for that. But Troy or Doug, did you have something you wanted to bring us back to? Or Troy?
I'll just say I'm going to throw I'm going to throw my own personal silver lining into the conversation real quick, because obviously we're talking about a lot of potentially heavy things, the government control, all of that kind of stuff, energy crisis. What is the future going to look like? And I would just say, personally, as a Christian, I love being able to talk about these kind of things and look at, do we need to, would it be good to enact some serious changes here? Is this something we need to focus on? Is there real data behind it? Is there not? But then also not have to go like headfirst into the scare tactic side of things and the anxiety side of things, because Wi-Fi might be able to figure out where I'm at, but God knows where everybody in the world is, and he knows exactly what's happening all the time, and he's not scared of the future. So I want to just interject that as a Christian. It's like it's really cool. I'm very thankful that I'm able to talk about topics like this without being afraid, and without being anxiety ridden, and I think there's a lot, I think that really is a big part of the problem when it comes to like the global warming and climate change and all, those kind of things. I think there's a reason why, a lot of that kind of stuff comes from the left, and I think it's because a lot of the times, more of the traditional Christian values are found, on the conservative side, and so it's like, I think there is, when you don't have that, and I'm not saying all conservatives are Christian, and I'm not saying everybody on the left is a hedonist or whatever, but it's like, it's like when you don't have that Christian faith, you don't have those core values and that belief that, hey, there's a divine being who loves me, who's going to take care of me. It's very easy to just like fly off the handle, when it comes to this kind of stuff, and feel like we're the only ones that can do anything about it. When it's like, no, the Bible says God holds the world and everything in his hands, so we have a hope no matter what's going on. So I just want to interject that, because I know for some people this can be a heavy topic and can kind of be a little scary.
Yeah. And I think we can all agree with that for sure. So one of the points that I wanted to make that I think is just a fun little side note that does, of course, dip into some conspiracy theory, that I think you guys will all really appreciate, is that the CERN Hadron Collider is in its third run right now. And it just so happens that it's been running, but they did a test for the Alice 3 program, is what they call it, on the day that the blackouts happened.
Like CERN did?
Yes. It's a at least that is on their schedule. I'm looking literally at their website, the Alice Collaboration CERN newsletter, and there's an Alice 3 days. It is called where is it?
They're like, we don't know why the blackouts happened. We're just using all the energy to charge portals to hell.
Yeah. that's man, you really can't summarize it any better than that. That's pretty good.
Yeah, they call it.
We got a new thumbnail for our next show. That's
so it's like a low. They're saying that it's like a low energy test, just to kind of see like what's going on. But it happened to start that exact test on that day.
What?
So, yeah, truth is stranger.
Well, I mean, look, if you got only so much energy and you don't have any of that inertia like we talked about, you either use it to power your country or you use it to open the portal to hell, like Troy said. So it's kind of like, which do you want? What's your priority? Like, what's the priority?
Hey, we got to open those portals, man. It's important to science. We got to be opening those portals.
The Pope just passed away, so I'm not even gonna go there.
Oh man,
a lot of things happening at once.
I think we're piecing together what's really going on here live. This is fantastic.
I was trying to figure out if actually the Pope opening the doors on Christmas had any connection to it. I haven't figured that one out yet, but I was going there for sure.
What else can we put in the pot here? We're putting this puzzle together live.
Had something to do with this.
Oh my god!
But here's I wanted to also pull this one up. This person said, where are we at? This one. It's caused by magnetic pulse within the Earth centered towards the Rock of Gibraltar. This is a really interesting comment because I just looked up the Rock of Gibraltar real quick because I don't know a whole lot about it. But the Rock of Gibraltar is a limestone rock. Do you guys remember what else? What recently we talked about that was
Pyramids episode.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. If y'all haven't heard our long talk about the pyramids, and
it's all very speculative, but very
fast. Check it out. Very interesting.
I am really curious to see what the official narrative reason for why these blackouts occurred is going to be once that initially comes out.
Well,
I know you'll have the official reason, and then you'll probably have some more underground conspiratorial.
Probably that
reason.
investigation will go on until some other big thing happens and nobody will talk about this again.
Right.
So for
And
us
then in
on
10
this,
years,
like
they'll be
that's
like,
the way it
oh,
goes.
yeah, that was a seagull
That will
like,
back in
pooped
10
on the
years. They're going to
ceiling.
say in 10 years they'll say, yeah, that was back when these things were rare. But actually, now they're happening all the time.
Could
so
be
yeah,
the
it should
case.
solve that one. So, any other thoughts here before I go into our next segment here?
One final thought. It's okay if I just add this one to the stage, Troy. Does this work all right?
Yeah.
Let's do this one over here, though.
Oh, perfect.
There you
Okay,
go.
I think I clicked on the wrong one. So I just wanted to reiterate, Troy, what you were saying from the more hopeful perspective. Also, just some hard data for the more hopeful perspective, and like a reason to not be in a panic about the climate and energy and all these sorts of things. This is just a little graph here, but what we see is on the left, it shows the rise in CO2 that's been in the atmosphere, which we've talked about that in the last 100 years. I already talked about the CO2 saturation and how more CO2 at this point doesn't equal greater warming. But there's all kinds of, I'm gonna dump this later in the chats, but there's all kinds of proof showing that we're actually at a 30-year low when it comes to like hurricane frequency and power. We're in a there's actually the ice caps have actually leveled out. The melting of the ice caps that's been occurring in the last 100 years, which is a normal thing. They melt, they come back, they melt, they come back. It's always happened. But in the last 20 years, they have leveled out. So in case anybody was thinking that the seas were going to rise up and wipe us out and all that kinds of stuff. There's so many things I could get into, but this is just one of them. This points to the fact that everything that the media says about droughts getting worse, hurricanes getting worse, disasters and fires being worse caused by, the climate and all those sorts of things. None of it is actually true. And you can kind of sum it up all in this little graph here. This is climate-related disasters and deaths. And this is the rate. This isn't the amount of people. This is the amount of people per million people. And so your chance of dying in a weather-related incident or climate-related incident has gone down by 98% in the last 100 years. So you have 1/50th of the chance that people in 100 years ago had to die in a drought or a storm. And this is across the entire world. And this writer, he's a big fossil fuel advocate and also nuclear power advocate. His whole point is that the largest reason for this is because of cheaper energy. In the last 100 years, we've produced lots of cheap energy, mainly because of fossil fuels. And energy makes countries wealthy and therefore makes countries safe. And the biggest reason why the news is able to push that like hurricanes and all these things are getting worse is largely just because there's more people and more buildings that live on the coast now than there were before. We've always had hurricanes. It's just we have a lot more people now living on the coast. But the positive side of that is we're more advanced now, and the more energy that you have, the safer of a civilization you have, because you're able to withstand for disasters. Whereas in the past, if you didn't have energy, you weren't able to do disaster relief and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, and so he actually makes the point that if we want this to keep going down and we want less deaths into the future, we need more energy, not less energy. Instead, the climate change activists are pushing, saying we need less energy to save people's lives. And it's actually the exact opposite. The more energy, the more human thriving that we have. And this graph kind of proves it. So that was my point, to continue with the hopeful. We are safer today from the climate than we've ever been before. And it's largely because of cheap energy.
I think that's a great summary of that conversation, or summary statement of the conversation. I mean, I think we need to be doing energy the right way, and the way that makes sense. And just think rationally. I mean, if you look at banks do loans based on likelihood of the loan being paid back. And if there was an issue with the sea levels rising in the next 10 years, do you think that you would be able to get a 30-year mortgage for oceanfront property? No, they're still doing 30-year loans. So refinancing all over the place. So don't worry about that. That's not a way for you to get out of a loan, is to have it drown. So I have to give my 2 cents also on this, trusting God in the situation, because I think it's good for us to push on all of this and be very clear about just kind of where this is going and the intentions and all that, not for us to do alarmism, but to expose that alarmism. Because if you look in the Bible, if you just study your Bible, you'll see God is in charge. You'll see God is sovereign over everything, and he is in charge, and he does what's good for the people who serve him and are called according to his purposes. That's Romans 8:28. And so I say all of this is to really push us closer to the Lord, like to have more intimacy with him, to have us to know what we individually need to do. We can talk with friends, we can talk with family, but what do we need to do to be prepared and to do all these things? And there's a time that will come. I did a podcast on this. It's like, are you ready to take a stand? Are you ready to be like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? They were the 4 people in that stadium of several 100,000 people, or the 3 people that wouldn't bow the knee, and they got thrown in the furnace. And so the question is, what's our priority? What are we going to stand for? And so I think that is really, we know what's coming. We understand the times, like the sons of Issachar. And so we need to be ready to take the stand, and we serve God and his kingdom and his purposes. And so that's really the point here, is you want to be informed so that you can seek the Lord and have the Holy Spirit tell you how you can take your stand, what you need to do for you and your family. So there's my thoughts on that. So God is absolutely in charge, and he's sovereign.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Okay. Let's talk about government controlled weather manipulation. We're already at an hour here. And so
Ryan, can I break in and add something?
Yeah.
Real quick, before we get too far away. I'm just doing a little research while you're talking, and I agree with everything you're saying. I'm going to throw this up on the screen. I feel like this is a little crazy. Okay. So Doug brought this up about CERN, right? We're talking about why did Spain? We might have just figured it out. Why Spain and into the blackout.
Breaking news.
So right here, you've got, this is CERN up here. So if you actually look at, I think it's a 25-mile diameter, the actual hadron collider that's under the ground here, and it's between France and, this is where it's at, in France and Switzerland. Is that right? Between the two of them. Anyways, so here's Spain down here, right? Here's Portugal. Okay. Check this out. Why did the blackouts happen? Okay. The sudden blackout in Spain and Portugal happened when the Iberian grid experienced a significant power imbalance, which triggered a self-defense shutdown. So there's a significant power imbalance the same day that CERN did this test that Doug was talking about.
So it doesn't fry the system. Yeah. It's like a breaker for your house.
Another AP News says Spain and Portugal are connected to Europe's main electric grid through France. So Spain's grid operator on Tuesday said that the sudden drop in power caused an interconnector between Spain and France to trip.
Huh.
I just saying, I feel like it's pointing to something, the power imbalance, like what caused the power imbalance in France, potentially the CERN test. I'm just saying.
I think we got our next episode lined up here.
I don't know. I'm just going to throw that out there. We're going to start the conspiracy theory now.
That's good stuff.
Some nice investigative journalism there.
Collider too. So I don't know what they're doing with that. They're building an even bigger one. I don't know where it is, though.
They are building a bigger one, which is like, what? It's not big enough. Like,
right. So the existing one is 17 miles approximately and 27 kilometers. So that's
27 kilometers. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna make a note. We talk so much about CERN right now. I forgot you guys did a whole video on CERN like a year or two ago. So I think we should put that in the comments so people can go watch if they want to. Y'all did a lengthy video all about CERN.
We're giving a lot of homework on this episode.
Reese, if anyone's interested, we'll drop that one for later.
Go into. I like it though. Give the homework and stay up to date. Okay, should we jump into this government weather manipulation? This sounds just absolute crazy. Like, I just think manipulating the weather. That sounds good. Yeah, go back to your basement and your tinfoil hat. Well, actually, let's go ahead and dive in here. Back in 1947, we had Project Cirrus, which is actually the first attempt to modify a hurricane. And they did that by seeding it with dry ice. So they go up with a bunch of dry ice and literally drop it into the middle of the hurricane. And this was a joint effort, documented. This was a joint effort from GE, General Electric, the U.S. Army, and the Navy. And the hurricane changed course, the course of direction. It was going out to the ocean. It took a hard turn. And so these actually, the people who study weather, they actually said this is like an unnatural turn. Like, they don't turn hard turns. Like, it's a curve, and you can really predict where they go. And this did a hard turn. And so that actually did a lot of destruction in Georgia, and it had a lot of public backlash and liability concerns. And they were kind of bragging about that they had done this, and then they saw what happened, and it's like, well, no, we didn't really do it. It was some other phenomenon or whatever we don't know about. And so they have rain enhancement, hurricane steering, storm suppression. They have, so that was 1947. Then you go into the 1960s and 1970s, you have Operation Popeye. This was in 67 to 72. This is the Vietnam War. And this was a covert U.S. military campaign using cloud seeding to extend a monsoon season over Ho Chi Minh Trail. And so The objective was to flood supply routes, to reduce enemy mobility. And the slogan, I'm not laughing at this, but it's just kind of like, I can't believe this is real, was make mud, not war. And so this was revealed in 1971. And so that brought an international condemnation of this. And so then you came with the treaties, the ENMOD treaty, the Environmental Modification Convention in 1978. And so this is from this international backlash. They had a UN treaty signed by over 70 nations, including the U.S. and the USSR, that prohibits the military or hostile use of environmental modification techniques. So, wait, okay, so you can still do peaceful weather modification. You know, you can still do it as long as you're not, you know, you just be honest. As long as you're not doing it for nefarious reasons, as long as it's just making rain and drought mitigation, we're good to go. Okay, so back to it. Let's go back. Now we got 1990. So, but good thing we went ahead and had our leadership make it safe for us to do this modification that they're doing.
Right, because everyone's always honest about their nefarious plans.
I know, right? Well, that's the thing, is we just got to put it in writing, and everybody's got to sign it, and then do a bunch of political campaign videos about it, and then we go back to what we're good to go. It's fine. Okay. Well, now we got back to the 1990s to today. So we have government weather modification projects. So what's going on today? China has the world's largest program. So they use cloud seeding. They did it for the 2008 Beijing Olympics to prevent rain. They did it. They have ongoing efforts to increase rainfall in over 2.1 million square miles by 2025. So by this year, the United Arab Emirates invests millions in drones to electrify clouds to induce rain. That's obviously in the desert. So they need that. Or they want that. That's why they do that. They have the U.S. doing more of this. Texas Weather Modification Board. They have cloud seeding in Nevada, California, Colorado. Russia has claims of being able to clear skies for military parades. And so this is what is public. This is what's publicly available. You know, you have India as well. You have there's different levels of public transparency. So obviously China, very low public transparency. United States is moderate public transparency. UAE is actually high level of transparency, like where they actually said, oops, we had too much and there was some flooding and like 1,200 people lost their homes. So sorry, we'll compensate. Like they're very transparent about it. Like that's what they're doing. Russia, low transparency. India, low transparency. So you have different public reasons for doing these kinds of things. But the thing is, there's more happening here. There's a geoengineering and climate control where they're actually putting aluminum and barium and strontium into the atmosphere. And like aluminum is very, aluminum is very unstable by itself. You usually see it paired with something else, and you don't really see it in nature, but they find it in the atmosphere. And so they're
right.
Chemtrails, contrails, whatever you want to call them. These are all real and legitimate. And so then you have this global dimming project, which the UK, I believe, is talking about now, where they're going to just dim the sun over their island. That's kind of, you know, they're good to go for that. But there's different experiments that have been done. There's documentaries out, all kinds of things of what's being put into the atmosphere. We can get into a lot more details on this. And there's like the environmental risks and public health. And you're seeing stuff show up in people's bloodstreams and crossing the blood-brain barrier and all kinds of things. That is these things being put into the atmosphere and on purpose, intentionally. And so there's a lot more to unpack there. That's probably an episode all on its own. But what do you guys think about that?
Well, one quick point. I mean, I know there's so much to get into, and I did a little bit of research on this, but I thought this was pretty crazy. There's a quote from Lyndon B. Johnson from 1962 in a speech that he gave all about weather control. And in his quote, he says, "He who controls the weather will control the world." And so it's kind of crazy. You know, I've heard examples, so many examples of the weather control and like how sophisticated that it's potentially gotten over the last few decades and the different kind of nefarious things that it's been used for. But I think something that's really kind of enlightening is the fact that I know we mentioned this before the podcast, but Bill Gates has been pushing for funding and he's been funding experiments to block out the sun for a while. And now you have the UK being like, all right, we're going to straight up do it. And of course, the more conspiratorial side is this has already been happening, that they've already been dumping chemicals into the atmosphere to try to sort of like limit the effect that the sun is having on the earth, which we could get into all the many reasons why that's a bad idea. But it kind of speaks to what Doug said earlier about the, like, we create a problem or we make up a problem to then have a solution for it. And the end result is kind of like, it's really just so that different powerful humans can kind of like play God and be like, well, we can control the weather now. Like this isn't going to have, and it's like, well, even if it does end up killing millions of people, at least they can make themselves feel good because they think that they're saving the planet from like even more billions of people from being killed. But it's one of those creepy things when you have people like Bill Gates and now the UK being like, oh, we're just going to block out the sun, which is like literally the story of the Matrix.
Right. It's
Yeah.
But that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. I mean, it's go ahead, Troy.
I'll throw my thought in there in conclusion. But yeah, one of the things I read, I didn't read a lot about it, but I read that specifically European Commission science advisors said that the technology to block out the sun would and probably could wreak havoc on the weather. So it's like you're kind of trading one thing for another, like, and the sun is what we need to sustain life. So like, yeah.
And I think it's a fraud to say that it's trading one thing for another. There may be people doing research and executing these kinds of things that think it's for the best for humanity, but the people driving this, that is not the goal. That is sort of the summary of this, is that this is not to do for the better of humanity, because you wouldn't see all these contradicting things. You would see things done in a more robust way that is more diligent and more in the details of all of this. So
talk about contradicting. The same people that want to power the earth with solar panels are the ones that say that we need to block out the sun.
Yeah, isn't that weird?
Case in point.
Just one of the many contradicting, but
Yeah.
I want to hear Doug's take on this.
So just to like bring it a little bit more full circle with the whole blackouts in Europe thing, and now the weather manipulation, we do have our own arm of that here in America, which is called HARP. I don't know if you guys know anything about HARP, but it's always fun to bring them up. But what they do is they manipulate the ionosphere, right? They manipulate the ionosphere and put that in conjunction with the ALICE program from CERN. Sorry, I got to take it there. ALICE actually stands for a large ion collider. So, I mean, put those two things together. We've got weather manipulation, the ionosphere, and then like in the air, and then the things that we're doing under the ground to also then manipulate ions. You're going to have some sort of reaction from that, and something is going to happen because of it. So I just thought that was an interesting point. But ultimately, my final belief on this aligns more with this comment.
Yeah, space lasers and sharks, people. Yep,
that's it right there.
I don't know where the sharks come from, but
Austin Powers.
Laser beams, man. Come on.
Laser beams attached to shark heads.
I haven't seen it.
Well, gentlemen, any other final concluding thoughts? I think this was a good conversation. We went well over an hour here, but I think there was a lot that we had to unpack. A lot of things. We also, I think, got content for another 20 or 30 episodes here. So we reduced this. I did enough research for us to do a half-day show, but we're going to cut it off now, I think. So any other final thoughts?
Well, I think you did a great job, Ryan, on giving us the rundown of, especially the tours of the different approaches to green energy across the world. I think it's really important to know what different countries have done and what's going on in different countries, so that way we can take a realistic approach to what does good energy production look like at home and abroad. So yeah, this is a great conversation. Good job.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for watching us. Make sure you check out our exclusive episodes. We got them over on Locals, and we also got them right here on YouTube. Thanks so much. God bless, and we'll see you in the next episode.